Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the mornings. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, October 1st, fiscal year 2026. Normal, regular, normie person year 2025, of course. But yes, we've turned over the fiscal calendar to a new calendar page and shut down the government. And, maybe ended it forever. It's going to be an interesting and new frontier, I think, in government shutdowns. I don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but it does seem to have a different feel to it. It's a little worrisome in that sense. And, we can explain a little bit about why. I'm sure we'll be talking about it. I will remind everybody, though, I spent the day yesterday. I think we made a pretty good observation. I mean, it's not a prediction. It's just a good observation that Republicans are like over 100 or whatever it's been in terms of blaming Democrats for government shutdowns. Government shutdown dance hasn't been around forever, but in the past 3 decades, it's been a pretty common, I would say, normally result of the breakdown of the legislative process, but now it's actually a tactic that people plan for and attempt to use against one another. But I've never seen Republicans yet, no matter how hard they try, and this is a perennial thing for them now, to successfully get the press to blame a shutdown on Democrats. Though very often in the early going, there are headlines that suggest that the major media are going along with it. And there's no difference today. There's plenty of headlines that are just outright blaming the failure, for instance, of the reconsideration of the bill in the Senate on Democrats. Democrats block the last-minute attempt to keep the government open and running. And sometimes they tell you it's a CR. It is a CR. You shouldn't doubt them on that. But that, too, has an interesting provenance. I don't know if we'll get into necessarily all of the procedure behind it. But I should remind everybody, we mentioned it yesterday. I think Ringwist brought it up the other day. A majority of the Senate, a clear majority of the Senate, voted to pass the House's CR and keep the government open. But it didn't work. The bill, as they usually say in the major media, the bill failed. And then everybody turns to the bill and says, why did you fail? And because it's it's an anthropomorphic cartoon, it can actually answer us, at least on television and in our imaginations. But the bill didn't fail. It failed. The Senate failed. But why did they fail? It was a 55-45 vote in favor of passage, but it failed. Why is that? Is it the go-to answer, the filibuster? Yes and no. Not really. There was no filibuster that went on yesterday. They very timely brought the thing to a floor vote and voted. Nobody stood up and talked. Nobody delayed anything. It was an order of the Senate, apparently entered onto the record on the 19th of September. I have to go back and see if I can dig up the order and take a look at it. Normally, these things are proposed, very often adopted by unanimous consent. And very often they are adopted by unanimous consent because they eliminate the problem of a filibuster but still erect the barrier of the filibuster. But if they are enacted by unanimous consent, that means Republicans had to agree to it. And they agreed to that. Why would they erect a barrier that makes it harder to keep the government open if they really, really didn't want the government to close and they really didn't want the embarrassment and didn't want to have the fight, as some people on Blue Sky are arguing with me from time to time? And the answer is that's a lie. They did want the government to close. They didn't want to make it easy to keep it open. Why else would you agree by unanimous consent to require 60 votes to pass the CR when 50 will do just fine? And that's the only answer there is. But somehow that gets translated by the casual observers. By the way, professional observers who are supposed to be watching what happens on Capitol Hill and be professional understanders of what happens there so that they can explain it to you, still write the headline. Well, I don't know. The understanders write the body of the article. I don't know what the body of the article says. I haven't had time to read it. We'll get to it, I'm sure. But the headline writers, who are professionally paid not to understand, say Democrats block the effort to reopen the government. And of course, it wasn't reopen the government. Guys, keep the government open. So it's all a string of near misses that somehow magically ends up messaging things just the way Trump wants them. And, well, maybe not just the way Trump wants them, because the way Trump wants it messaged is even worse. And I'm sure we'll get to that, too. Greg Dworkin waiting in the wings. I better bring him in because, once again, work going on at the house that's going to possibly take him away. So we'll keep we'll try and keep the fanfare relatively short. How about that one? We'll go with, I don't know, you need something grandiose, but not that long. A cinematic entrance for Greg Dworkin. Everybody knows this one. Actually, this one's not all that short either. Bum, 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 bum. You can't cut that off. Good morning, Greg Dworkin and all ships at sea and working on your bathroom. How you doing?
That's a good one. You know, MGM line. How about that?
Oh yeah.
Meow.
Forgot that. I've got to dig through the cartoon archive for you. I know that's your favorite.
It is. I love
okay,
cartoons. Tom
and Jerry next.
Yeah. If I could find something appropriate from the old Popeye, that'd be great. You know. But anyway, so the two big stories. I don't even know which one to start with.
Me neither. Let's leave.
I'll tell you. I have a video for you, which is kind of a weird video. It says right in the list that I sent you, video. Look above. It's a video. It's actually a video. It's from a tweet from Tennessee Holler, although a lot of people have sent it. And what it is a video of Pete Hegseth addressing the camera as if he's talking to the generals.
Okay.
And it's clearly made for TV.
Yes.
And he has this applause line and says, "We're so lethal, our enemies are about to FAFO." And he pauses for dramatic effect, waiting for applause that never comes. Or
laughter, something.
That never comes.
He's in a room
and then at the end of
military.
his speech, which I don't have, he also ends and he waits for applause and he stands there nonplussed on stage because there isn't any.
Yeah.
They gave him the silent treatment. And then he sort of slouches off. You can't see the slouch off over the radio, of course.
Right.
But you could hear the dramatic pause with nothing happening. So I thought maybe if you could find that. I keep talking so that you can find it.
Okay. Well, I think I'm ready to press the button now. So, all right. Here we go. We have Pete Hegseth. This is the big conclusion, I think. I saw this part.
In other words, to our enemies, FAFO.
Two people said woohoo.
In other words.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Two people said booyah, right? I mean.
Yeah. And I think he could rely on this as an excuse. I think the room full of top generals know pretty well. They're supposed to kind of sit on their hands for what was essentially a political speech. I know Hegseth thinks it's a doctrinal speech, but even so, that's what they do. They sit there in respectful silence, and then when he leaves, I saw that part too. He does his last, hurrah thing and expects to leave the stage to thunderous applause, but instead gets, room attention and stand, and then they wait for him to leave, and then the generals will leave. I guess that's kind of what they do.
But they're not leaving because after him, Trump comes.
Oh, right. Yes, that's right. So they have to sit there in silence again, I guess.
Well, it was dramatic and it was embarrassing. Yeah. And he looked like a fool, and he is a fool.
Well, that seemed obvious. He was never going to get away with lecturing.
No, I mean, you can't have a ninth grader lecture the senior generals on how wars are fought.
Right. I mean, even if they're wrong, they're going to get upset with you for thinking you know more than they do when they're generals and you're just a weirdo from TV.
Yeah, with no staff because you can't keep staff.
Right.
To tell you that you shouldn't do this. And of course, it's a somebody put it on Twitter. It's an operational security. It's an OPSEC mistake to bring all your leadership together at one point because bomb goes off and the entire leadership is wiped out. And the problem is that OPSEC was overruled by TripleSec.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the kind of sec that works for him.
Right. And so after he's done, after making a clown of himself, then Trump comes.
Yes.
And I guess the best summary I can have of what Trump said was actually in the papers. There's some interesting things. First of all,
Yes.
Tom Nichols summarizes the actual situation here. The real sitch. The commander-in-chief is not okay. Trump put on a disturbing show for America's generals and admirals.
Yes.
And it was disturbing.
Don't forget your admirals.
Right. Generals and admirals, because the Navy doesn't have generals.
Right. But if they did, they'd be there too. But admirals.
General store. I want the general store there. Who's general store? Mr. Store?
Right,
could you
really?
Please?
Honest to God. Really? As STOHR, I'm sure, but still, right. He's seated next to General Electric. I'm positive of that, right? All right. General Chaos.
General Accounting. I mean, there's a whole bunch of generals that were there from the Navy, but I just don't understand why they, and he basically said to them, you have to agree with me. I'm sure you agree with me. If you don't, you can leave and your rank will be diminished and I'll fire you and this, that, and everything else. And a bunch of nonsense.
Oh, he did. Yeah, that's right. There was that line. Yeah, if you don't think so, you're in the wrong job, essentially, and I'll get rid of you.
Right. So
nice.
Tom Nichols says, all in all, an utterly embarrassing address, but that wasn't the worst of it. The assembled military leaders likely already knew Hegseth is unqualified for the job, and they could mostly tune out the sloganeering. The Hegseth, a former TV host, was probably aiming more at Fox News and the White House than the military. You could tell that because when he said his FO line, he wasn't looking at the audience. He looked directly to camera when he said that.
And what a grin on his face. Oh, all the kids at home are going to know this one. It looked idiotic, of course. It looked like, hey, well, who put this middle schooler in charge of the military?
Right. What they could not ignore, however, was the spectacle that Trump put on when he spoke after Hegseth. The president talked at length, and his comments should have confirmed to even the most sympathetic observer that he is, as the kids say, not okay.
Yeah. He's not.
Trump
people
seemed quieter and more confused than usual. He's not accustomed to audiences who don't clap and react to applause lines. I've never walked in a room so silent before, he said at the outset.
Sure you have. But okay. He was upset about that.
Well, they were listening to Hegseth, so there was nothing to say.
Right.
The president seemed unprepared. He started rambling right out of the gate. First, the president channeled his inner Jeb Bush, asking the officers to clap, but, only if they felt like it.
Okay.
Here's the quote. Just have a good time, he said when they were not doing anything. And if you want to applaud, you applaud. And if you want to do anything you want, do anything you want. If you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave. Of course, there goes your rank. There goes your future, but you can leave.
Sure. Right. And if you feel like applauding, applaud. If you want to be promoted, applaud. And if you want to be fired, don't. Gotcha. Have some paper towels. Have a good time, everybody. Wow.
Yeah. Let's pretend it's Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Then, he rambled. But.
Sure.
But, I mean, he had some highlights, He congratulated himself on tariffs, noting the money could buy a lot of battleships, to use an old term. And come to think of it, he said, maybe America should build battleships again from steel, not paper mache and aluminum like the Navy uses.
Yeah. Any Navy guys in the room, you think?
He's talking about the Sheffield, the British ship in the Falklands War.
Is he?
It got hit by one missile and melted.
Okay.
You remember that?
Not offhand,
one ship
but
Britain won that war, but the one ship they lost, the Sheffield, had too much aluminum in it, and when it got hit by a very hot missile, it literally melted.
Well, that doesn't sound great.
So that's what he's talking about. But those aren't U.S.
Stuck in the 80s, and also, right. That's what if I told you that was a different country 40 years ago, and we had nothing to do with it?
So, as Tom Nichols points out, that nakedly partisan appeal to the U.S. military is a violation of every standard of American civil-military relations going back to George Washington.
Yeah.
And then he said,
what?
we should use some of those dangerous cities as training grounds for our military because we're going into Chicago very soon. It's a big city with an incompetent governor, stupid governor, bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And in the first term, Nichols says the president was surrounded by people who ensured some of his nuttiest and most dangerous ideas were derailed, like Tom Mattis. They're not here now. You get peak headset,
Yeah.
So this follow-up, and the thing I thought was interesting is that they're sort of saying this was bad, rather than trying to cover him and sane-wash him. This is from the Washington Post. Military leaders voiced concern over Hegseth's new Pentagon strategy The critiques from multiple top officers, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, came as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reorders U.S. military priorities. People familiar with the editing process who, like others, spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe sensitive deliberations, described a growing sense of frustration with the plan from Hegseth. They consider myopic and irrelevant given the president's highly personal and sometimes contradictory approach to foreign policy. You can say the same thing about the attempt to get a ceasefire deal in the Middle East. I don't know if we'll have time to talk about that today, but it's a hot mess. and the short, abbreviated, I can't spend too much time on this because tomorrow it's something different. Trump is trying to put pressure on Turkey, on Qatar, and on Egypt to push Hamas to surrender. That's his peace plan.
Yeah. I mean,
it may or may not work, let's just say.
It's a plan.
He got Netanyahu to buy into it, but Netanyahu added a whole bunch of language making it unacceptable to those three others, so that's where things stand on that. In this, Trump is trying to say it's okay for the military to work domestically, like what's the problem? And even the New York Times, which tends to wash everything Trump does, says Trump gave the military's brass a rehashed speech, which is what it was. That in and of itself is okay.
He didn't even know he was going to do it.
Until minute 44, as says the headline. On an almost daily basis, thousands of words pour forth from the president's mouth. Sometimes he tucks in a wildly revealing insight about the direction he's taking the country. And for the New York Times to flat out say that, I was taken aback. I didn't expect that.
All right. Well, it sounds like a good intro to something. Yeah.
And the meat of it here. But if the generals were paying attention during minute 44, they would have heard the fleeting but unmistakable sound of something new, something different.
All right.
I told Pete we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military. We should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military. The President of the United States said.
Yeah. No.
That's bad.
That is not how this works!
I agree.
Thank you.
But at least if they didn't hear him say that, they would have heard that and then said, wait, what did he just say? Yeah, so, whatever. Posse comitatus, levying war against the United States, tantamount to treason. It could be any one of those things.
Then they add this. There's the matter of his delivery. It's become harder to perceive the occasionally revealing things President says because of the way he sometimes says them. For a 79-year-old, he's often shown a great deal of energy. That is to say, the Adderall hadn't worn off yet.
Right.
But he seemed a bit sapped Tuesday. As his remarks went on and on, his voice took a monotonous quality. A day earlier, he sounded out of breath at times. Even though Tuesday's speech was not so different, he still seemed intent on winning the audience. I've never walked in a room so silent before.
Right.
He told the brass, you just feel nice and loose. Okay. They left out the whole rest of it, saying, and if you don't like it, you can leave and you get fired.
Bit of sand washing there.
Do that part.
He was
so
just
they
joking.
Still do. Yeah, exactly. And everybody laughed and thought it was really funny and they had a good time.
So that'll be on video, right? Show it to me. No, nobody did. Okay, weird. Yeah. He's nuts. What can I tell you? Lots of people are noticing it and beginning to say so. Newspapers still hesitant to say so, but at least some major politicians just finally coming right out and saying it. Pritzker yesterday just saying we really ought to be. The president's unwell. We really ought to be talking about the 25th Amendment removal at this point. Why aren't people saying so? Okay, good. I mean, it won't happen because Pritzker says so, but you should be saying so anyway.
So the second big story, of course, as you pointed out, you're supposed to have an image of a cartoon rolled up Bill talking to you, sitting on the steps, singing.
Dejectedly waiting for,
waiting to be passed. I'm just a Bill. That's the way you're supposed to look at this stuff.
Sure.
And thank you for that explanation about what's going on in the Senate. They got...
I got to start looking for that. Yeah.
The Senate to say, even though you don't need 60 votes, you need 60 votes, and nobody knows why, and you think it's because...
There's an order of the Senate. They've agreed. They must have had a probably unanimous consent agreement to just say, and they do this sometimes when they see a bill that could be filibustered, but they really don't have time to work out cloture. And the 30 hours afterwards, they say, I tell you what, if we just
so as an agreement, we agree that filibuster rules apply.
Right. It just make it a 60 votes to pass and just go straight to that vote. And if you want your 60 threshold, here it is. Everybody says yes. But if they say yes, then they're on the hook for it.
Yeah, then they agree to the 60 votes. So they could have said no. The filibuster on this thing, and they decided not to.
Yes, right. Or they could have just said, all right, we'll allow for the filibuster, and then we will ask for votes on cloture. Well, and then if you don't provide, then it's a lot clearer, at least.
But I'm slow, so explain this to me again like I'm a civilian.
I don't know. What did I miss?
They have 53 votes because there's 53 Republicans and 47 Democrats.
Okay.
So why did they bother with the 60? They didn't need Democrat support.
Right.
They could have just said, this is like everything else. It only takes 50 and that's what we'll do. And that's the end of it.
The procedural motions to get to the vote could have been filibustered. And they might not have been able to achieve 60 for cloture.
So they did all of this to avoid a filibuster that they knew was coming, and so they agreed to pretend it's a filibuster so that you didn't have a real filibuster because, in fact, in Washington speak, it's a lot faster.
Right. You would have run out of time. The government would have shut down probably before
Right.
you
You're
had
trying to avoid a shutdown. You had till midnight last night.
Right. In order to get the vote first. Right. But they did leave, by the way, 2 hours shy of midnight. People are trying to convince me that Republicans are trying desperately. They desperately want the Democrats to agree to keep the government open. I actually read it the opposite.
No, here's the deal.
Oh, all right.
They don't care whether the government shuts down or not. It's okay if it stays open, in other words.
That's it.
What they want is they want to smack the Democrats in the face and say, whatever is decided, it's clearly an L for you, and we need to label you as such. That's what they want. They don't really care about whether the government works or not. They just want to stick it to Democrats, which is the entire ethos of the Republican Party, by the way, which is why you never get the Republicans, whether the voters or the electeds, to break with Trump, because their first interest isn't necessarily supporting Trump, it's to stick it to Democrats. That is their whole party philosophy. It is unbreakable, unshakable. That's what they want to do. And here's the government shutdown, and it's the same thing. I don't care about Affordable Care Act or not. We took our lumps with McCain. We understand it's popular. I get all of that. The really important thing is to do something that's going to stick it right in the Democrats' face, and that's what we want.
Yeah.
So the way the Punch Bowl, for example, a Republican-oriented gossip sheet, is covering this, they write, in an interesting development, 2 additional Senate Democrats voted for the GOP CR continuing resolution, that is, on Tuesday night, bringing the total of 3. Catherine Cortez and Angus King joined Fetterman. The point of saying that is that John Thune, the Senate leader, is counting on those people folding to give him enough votes. So he passes this despite everything Chuck Schumer is trying, and that's their idea of a win.
Yes. Okay.
If they set it up so that it won with 53-47, it's not the smack in the face against Democrats that they crave. They want Fetterman and others to desert Schumer and make him look like a fool. That's what their angle is, at least in the first 24, 48 hours. It may change as time goes on.
Okay.
But they're far more focused on that, in my view, than they are on, for example, polling that's out that shows that Republicans will get blamed more than Democrats for a shutdown, which makes total sense. Again, the media is struggling with this. They say Democrats are trying to make the case that Republicans hold all the levers of power. They're trying to make the case that they're the majority in the House, Senate, and White House, and somehow, therefore, they're responsible for the shutdown. Well, duh, that's true.
Yeah.
And the public is buying it. So the way that the newspapers are putting it is, so far, Republicans haven't succeeded in blaming Democrats for the shutdown.
Right. Okay.
What do you mean? Republicans are responsible for the shutdown.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well,
they've haven't
why would
succeeded.
they be trying to do that if they weren't responsible?
How about Democrats are succeeding in blaming Republicans for the shutdown? Why don't you write it that way? Well, we can't write that. That's not the way we're oriented.
That's true. It is interesting to see because not only do they get the whole dynamic of it backwards, but I noticed, I think one of the major paper headlines was, Democrats block, da-da-da-da-da. But, in addition to getting the dynamic wrong, it's interesting because in another time, they would have reported this as either the bill failed as opposed to one party or another doing something. If Republicans block it, the bill fails. But also they would have noted, well, you just said Angus King, John Fetterman, Catherine Cortez Masto. That's a bipartisan vote. That's what they used to call a bipartisan vote. If Joe Lieberman votes for it, it's bipartisan. And they would say there's a bipartisan coalition against this continuing resolution. Sorry, can't help you. Trying to ram it through is contrary to the interests of the American people. The bipartisan answer is no. Sorry. Well, the bipartisan vote in that case was yes, but there was still also a bipartisan vote for no. Any way you slice it, Rand Paul voted no. So the yes votes were bipartisan, the no votes were bipartisan. What happened to that? I don't know. They didn't go to their usual dodge. Meanwhile, I just realized now we're at the end of the first half. Everybody needs to stop work there so that we can do a second 30 minutes. Right. I don't know. We'll see how you're doing after the break if all the saws start going.
Right. Well, there's already some decisions I have to go. There's some missing stuff on the things they sent this morning. So
you just cover it with newspaper.
Right.
I think. Is it right?
I do that for the dog.
Right. Or scraps from the Sheffield will be.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Anyway, take care. And that's the story. That's my biased and jaundiced view. It's all about sticking it to Democrats. Everything is. And if you don't understand what's going on in Washington, if you use that as your baseline, your North Star, you'll suddenly understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Take care. And I'll talk to you on maybe Friday, but certainly Monday.
Yeah, if we can. All right. Very good. Thanks. And welcome to everybody. Keep the noise down there. Here you're doing good work.
They're doing great work. Take care.
Hi, everybody. This is Scott Anderson, your summary guy. Were you looking forward to an egalitarian democracy free of bigotry, misogyny, racism, and greed, where people of different appearances, belief, and heritage had a right to live without fear, and everyone could expect a basic level of health, stability, and safety throughout their life? Well, too bad. The plain fact is that we're heading in the wrong direction. And where we once had a voice in such things, increasingly we don't. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. However, if you're looking to join people who understand today's issues and can intelligently address the reality of today from your point of view, you can join us at Kagro in the morning. As you know, there aren't many of us out there, at least compared to them. We need to stick together, and by that I mean send us money. That is contributions to patreon.com, secure, reoccurring contributions. Those contributions keep this show on the air and us together. We've been through a lot together. The temporary loss of the presidency, we hope. The temporary loss of the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, we hope. Face it, we are pretty much all that we have left. Remember, we couldn't do it without you, and you shouldn't do it without us. We're in this together, so thanks.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's, I don't know where we're going to start today. There's a lot to double back on. I've been looking through the congressional record in the hopes of finding the order. It is referenced in the legislative history of the CR that supposedly failed to pass in the Senate yesterday, referencing an order of the Senate of September 19th, 2025. And I'm looking around to see if I could find the wording for it and how it was exactly put. But generally speaking, these things will have been entered onto the record probably by unanimous consent in this thing. And as I said, they were planning ahead. September 19th would have been the date that the Senate first considered and rejected the House version of the CR, which they reconsidered yesterday. And I don't know. I was looking around. I'm sure at that time they knew that was going to fail. And by the way, I think it failed even worse at that point. Not everybody voted. I think there was an additional Republican vote against the House CR from Murkowski. She, I guess, must have either flipped or I guess everybody was accounted for in the vote yesterday. So she flipped and voted yes, probably on the premise that, golly, a shutdown is so lousy and we don't want one. which, some Republicans don't want one and some Republicans don't care, and some of them actively want to have it. By the way, in case you're wondering, do I need to clarify it? I don't think I've been discussing it a lot on Blue Sky, but I don't think I've really given it more than 30 seconds. At the close of yesterday's show, I blurted something out about why it is that I think Republicans are so actually actively interested in shutting down the government this time. And today's summary of it comes off of Aaron Rupar's capture of Mike Johnson on TV today on Fox. Is he on regular Fox? Is he on Fox Business? I can't tell. I got to enlarge the picture in order to tell. Does it really matter? I don't think so. But it looks like the Fox Business screen. It is. And it is Johnson quoted as saying, he's talking to that weirdo, the other weirdo drunk ass, not the one that got appointed to D.C. U.S. Attorney. That's Jeanine Pirro. And she was from regular Fox News. The other drunk-sounding lady, Maria Bartiromo, who I don't know if she's drunk or not. She just puts on a good act, maybe. I don't know. A lot of people say she's a bit of a wino as well. But anyway, Mike Johnson on the shutdown. Here's the quote. It can provide an opportunity to, it says downside, but I am sure they mean downsize. It can provide an opportunity, big opportunity in the shutdown, which says to me, no, they're not really working hard to avoid it. It can provide an opportunity to downsize the scope and scale of government, which is something that we've always wanted to do. So in a way, Chuck Schumer has now handed the keys to the kingdom to, the missing word to, the executive branch under President Trump. This is a great quote because it's very revealing and it puts it all on the line. But he says it, of course, in ways that are meant to be like absorbed by, I don't know, I probably like 99.9% of the population. And certainly the MAGA population will say, oh, keys to the kingdom to the executive branch under President Trump. Yay. What does that mean? And how should you regard it? Well, there's a lot packed into that. First of all, that the shutdown is an opportunity. Wow. No, it's not. It's quite the opposite of an opportunity. But even if it was an opportunity, if you're looking at it from the negative, right? What is it an opportunity to do? Downsize the scope and scale of government, which is something that we've always wanted to do. We know about that. But then, if you've been alive, let's say today and a few days prior, or a couple of months prior, or since January, for instance, you would know, what do you mean an opportunity to downsize the scale and scope of government? You've been doing that since January. The dodgy boys wrecked the place. There's thousands of people out of work now as a result of that. Thousands more facing further downsizing, like our own Darwin, for God's sake, which we mentioned yesterday. And by the way, again, anybody in federal contracting world, logistics, military bent, perhaps, would do well to hire this Navy veteran. Just contact me and I'll let you contact him. We'll keep it safe that way. Anyway, another plug for him. Although, if you're willing to move to Connecticut and get into contracting, Darwin, we know some guys there. Anyway, the point here is it provides an opportunity to do more of the same. Gee whiz. Wow, thank God that opportunity arose, which we've always wanted to do and have been doing since January. They've always talked the big game for the last 30 plus years. They've wanted to drown the government, make the government small enough to drown it in a bathtub, which is why Greg took the bathtub out of his house and is installing a walk-in shower. It's very difficult to drown in a walk-in shower. I think I could rig it up if we asked them to, but that's not what we want. Plus, it probably ends up falling through the second floor down to the... All right, you get the idea. If you flood your shower, you're in trouble. You don't want that. So in a way, Chuck Schumer has now handed the keys to the kingdom that the executive branch of the kingdom of the executive branch to President Trump. What else is happening here? There's more to unpack. What is it? It's this. The reason they're so interested in a shutdown is that they believe it gives them a Article 2 inherent powers free-for-all, is how I've been putting it this morning. I was saying, look, it's the view of the Trump White House that the I'm going to invoke terms we've talked about a number of times on the show for years and before this show. Their view is that the unitary executive, remember that? that the entirety of Article 2 and the executive branch are wrapped up in the personality of the president, that he ultimately, all people who work anywhere in the executive branch work his will and at his will. He can fire anybody, do anything, order anything, and if you don't like it, you're out. That's the basics of unitary executive theory. Their view is that the unitary executive, though, as embodied by Donald Trump or any president, but not really. Right now we say wink, wink, any president. Later on we say, no, we didn't mean that. But the unitary executive, the president, can't be shut down, right? You could have a complete government shutdown. And I think we're working on a total government shutdown. I don't think there were any. I have to check this. But remember that there's 12 separate appropriations bills that work different parts of the government. And very often, these days, most often, they end up reaching the end of the fiscal year with only some of them passed. And they need a CR to avoid a government shutdown. But they also, if you're reading closely and they're reporting correctly, they'll be saying a partial government shutdown, because if you've funded the agriculture department and the military branches and the legislative branch and science and science, space and technology group, it's not by department per se, but different areas of responsibility. And if you've passed 6 of the 12 or 4 even of the 12 appropriations bills, it's the other 8 that shut down. The 4 that have got their appropriations can continue on, partial government shutdown. If you've done none of them or almost none of them, that would be a regular. They don't even bother telling you total government shutdown. And that would be a bad description anyway, because of course essential functions continue. And among the essential functions, most people would consider essential functions, things like Social Security checks. You worry about them not being paid out. But Social Security is part of the mandatory spending side of the ledger. It doesn't need an annual appropriation. So the end of the fiscal year doesn't impact that, although it impacts the paychecks of all the people who cut those checks and mail them, if they still do that, or process them electronically through the banks. There's all of that. But what I was saying, there's so much complexity to this. I know it's annoying. But what the White House view of this is that the unitary executive, the presidency, is one of those essential employees. You can't shut him down. The president remains the president, right? Just by the way, we'll probably see someone like Trump claiming the opposite for the Congress itself. Congressional employees can be furloughed, and most of them are essential staff, chief of staff to the members of Congress. Maybe 1 or 2 others, they stay on, although a lot of times they demand that their people work while they're on furlough, they just don't get paid. But anyway, the point is you can't close Congress either. And that's actually a much more logical point. Like if Congress was shut down because there was a government shutdown, how would you reopen government, right? Congress has to pass a CR to reopen things. But if they were closed, they couldn't pass a CR. So you should be able to figure that one out on your own. But that doesn't matter, because this current president will probably tell you, no, the Congress shuts down too. This is the end of government. I actually believe he probably sees it this way, but a more limited view that is actually shared by the others around him in the White House is that you can't shut down the unitary executive. So what does that mean? That means Congress hasn't appropriated any money for any programs, and they haven't made any decisions about what they will pay for and what they won't pay for. But they are, and while they can come back and vote on that stuff, they haven't so far. So that leaves the only thing, in Trump's view, the only one left standing, Trump. The president himself can't be shut down. The rest of the executive branch can be, but the unitary executive that can order everything to happen can't be shut down. So in their view, what is the opportunity of a government shutdown? It's an Article 2 inherent powers free-for-all. The president can, in the absence of approved government funding and the absence of Congress, which is not happening, it's not absent, but he considers it absent, or at least the absence of their ability to make decisions on spending and withholding money, that responsibility devolves to the president and the unitary executive. So in their view, since the unitary executive can't be shut down, Trump can order personally any spending that he wants, any cuts that he wants, and all the people who might otherwise ordinarily try to stop him or curtail his power or check and or balance it can't do it because they're closed. They're furloughed. So a government shutdown, in Trump's view, is a temporary, possibly, but totally legal and constitutional dictatorship until the Congress reopens the government. Now, we said it before, and we'll say it again. That's not how this works. And, anybody with a brain in their head knows that's not. However, the people on your television do not have brains in their heads, and they are also partisan Republicans, and they're telling you, it's so crazy, it just might work. This is their view of this, and this is why they're so excited about the shutdown, and why, at the very least, they are not working at all to try to resolve it. That is not how this works, of course. But why would he come to such a conclusion? Besides being crazy, there's that. Besides the fact, I think we've established pretty well, that he has a child's understanding of how the government works, like even dumber and more simplistic than the bill is an anthropomorphic cartoon that sits on the steps of the Congress and waits for friendly kids to talk to it about how it will get passed. That's at least the basics of how things actually work. But Donald Trump essentially thinks, and has always thought, the president can do whatever he wants. And he's said as much, like as president. But I think even prior to being president, he just thought the president is a very powerful guy. And I know there's like laws and stuff, but basically when the president tells you this is going to happen, it's going to happen. When the president says do this, you got to do this because he's the president. He's extremely important. And that's just that's the sum total of his understanding of how things work, which explains a lot. How can the government take 10% ownership in Intel? It can't. Yes, it can. The president says so. So what? That's what I think. So that's what we're going to do. How can the president order networks to fire their late night hosts? He can. He's super powerful, but that's a private business. And I don't know. We can make things for some of those deals. He probably understands where like, well, we're going to have the FCC cut you off and rescind your license if you don't. Well, there's a lot of moving parts to get to that. How do they work? I don't know. It doesn't matter. I'm going to order them to happen. Because why? Because the FCC is in what branch? It's really not. It's kind of an independent agency, but still, the FCC membership is nominated by the president. Therefore, executive branch, therefore, unitary executive, therefore, the president can order the FCC to do what he says they need to do. Now, they can futz around and vote on it and pretend that they're independent. But if they vote no on the thing I want, I'll fire everyone who voted no and replace them with people who will vote yes. And then they will do what I want, which means that they're not an independent agency. But it doesn't matter because unitary executive and I can fire whoever I want. But they're appointed to terms of years precisely so that the president can't do that unless they're being fired for cause about something that they've done that's illegal or improper on the job. But we're litigating that right now because the president says cause can be anything. Like, for instance, a hallucinated crime. In the case of Lisa Cook at the Fed, for instance, or any of the other people that they're hallucinating this stuff. We imagine there was mortgage fraud. Why do we think so? Because she's black and she's got more than one house. How else could that happen? Everybody knows black peoples are poor. Like, that's the Trump brain. Right? So it must be mortgage fraud. And if it's not, well, then it probably, I don't know, it should have been. Anyway, the point is you said for cause and I said just because I don't like her, I fired her. I mean, he's still walking around. I don't know if anybody has told him, by the way, sir, the paperwork, like as though he were going to examine it. The paperwork says No, there was no mortgage fraud. She told everybody exactly what these properties were going to be used for and how they would be characterized. You're just wrong. You're hallucinating a crime. No, I'm not. Although maybe the other day might have been hallucinating what's happening in Portland. Am I being shown television stuff that's old or maybe even fake? Golly, there was this moment where he was awakening to that. But his childlike understanding of the president being the most powerful guy in the whole wide world results in him, accepting this idea. There are theoreticians in the White House who are providing him with the complicated stuff that I don't know if I could exactly explain it, but what it comes down to, the quote, right? You think I'm kidding. You do remember that the quote was, and I may have a word or two wrong, but basically what I have an Article 2, which means I can do whatever I want as president. Oh, that's just Trump being Trump. No. Oh, he's just kidding. No, he honestly, I guess it is Trump being Trump anyway, but that's what he believes. Article 2 is the ultimate power. And every once in a while, the Supreme Court keeps handing him reason to believe that. A ruling that in the hands of the theoreticians comes through to him. Well, basically, there's a whole bunch of legal mumbo jumbo, sir, but basically they said, yes, inherent powers and the unitary executive theory combine to give you a right. Well, the thing you wanted to do, they're going to either allow you to do, or they're going to say, we can't at this point decide to stop you from doing it. We may later go through some litigation to see if there's some limitations to it, or maybe even that it's outright wrong. But for right now, you're going to be allowed to do it. And Trump is, I could die from a cheeseburger any second, so letting me go for 6 months, that's as good as forever. Plus I'll forget. And then, and if in 6 months that judge rules against me, I'll deport him and replace him with somebody else. And I'll say, I want the appeal to be I want a do-over, but that's not a thing that can be done. So, well, make it a thing that can be done. Now they may never succeed in that, but he'll believe that they should have, and he'll fire them too. The point is he's running around thinking he can do this, and he's got theoreticians telling him, you don't want all the complicated stuff, but basically the outcome is, yeah, you can do that. Russell Vogt is telling him, you can do pocket rescissions. No, you can't. The answer to that, of course,
that is not how this works!
Right, and that whole, does everybody remember that mechanism? The idea that if I just say I'm impounding this money that Congress appropriated, and Congress will then say, you can't impound money. We had that litigation already. We passed a law, anti-impoundment, an impoundment act that prevents you from doing this. If you want to strike money out of the budget that's already been approved, what you need to do, because Congress approves the budget, is come to us with the suggestion that we take it upon ourselves to rescind that funding. It's not unlike what you wanted to do with the FCC, right? I want to remove their license. Well, the vote was, no, you can't do it. Well, I'm going to replace all the people on the FCC and ask them to, quote unquote, vote again. But that's essentially it, right? If the Congress says, all right, we'll rescind the money, Trump, and let's say they succeed and do that, Trump views that as, I told you I impounded the money. No, you didn't impound the money. You asked the Congress to rescind the money. Well, same difference in the end. If you win, yes. And then again, you got a problem with the child here. If you lose, and then he says, this is terrible. All the people who voted no are guilty of treason, and we're going to get rid of them, or we're going to gerrymander them out of their seats, or they should be arrested, or they did mortgage fraud. Anything he can do to try and alter things such that eventually they say, all right, fine, we'll rescind the money. And then he can say, see, I told you I impounded it. And he would still be wrong, because that is not how this works. But rather than bother with the actual rescission process, Russell Vogt told him, well, if you say you impound the money, right, and they say, no, you didn't, and they go to litigate that out. Now, on an unlimited timeline, you would lose, presumably, if there's law, you would lose that litigation. The Supreme Court would say, nothing I can do to help you with that one. The law is clear. You're not allowed to just impound money. Now, they may say, on the other hand, we might rule the Impoundment Act unconstitutional because you have an Article 2 that says you can do whatever you want as president, and now you're not able to do whatever you want, so it must be unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court has done that, or the rough equivalent of that. I say I have presidential immunity forever for everything. No, you don't. There's no such thing. Actually, what if you did have that? Say 5 black robes, and now we've got it. Oh, actually, the 14th Amendment says you can't run for president. Well, maybe it doesn't say that. Okay, well, then it doesn't. And Trump says, there you go. It now doesn't. And he's not wrong at that point. But along the way, I'm going to impound this money. Russell Vogt says, tell you what, they're going to litigate this. And again, on an unlimited time horizon, you lose. But if October 1st arrives before we get to an answer in that litigation, you've just achieved a pocket rescission. Why? Because the money that was appropriated is supposed to be spent inside of this fiscal year. If you block it by illegally impounding it, unconstitutionally impounding it, and they litigate and litigate and litigate, but October 1st comes around and now we're in fiscal year 2026, there's no legal authority to spend that money. The appropriation for it, the appropriation authority has expired. There isn't any going forward from October 1st. So therefore, the money that's been held in limbo just poof, either disappears or at least the authority to spend it disappears. I call that, Russell Vogt says, a pocket rescission. The president declares it. The Congress opposes it. They litigate it. But then time runs out, not unlike what they used to call the pocket veto. Everybody remember this one, or how vetoes work? House passes it, Senate passes it, goes to the president vetoes it. It gets sent back to Congress. They can vote to override the veto. 2/3 vote in both houses, they override the veto, right? Anything less, the veto stands. All of that, you understand. But the pocket veto is something that also is a limited time thing. If the president either vetoes it and sends it back or declines to veto it and waits out the 10 days. Remember also, if the president doesn't veto it, but also declines to sign it, it still becomes law after 10 days anyway. So if a law gets sent, or a bill that's passed both houses gets sent to the president within 10 days of the dissolution of the legislature, the adjournment of the legislature, Congress, sine die, as they say. It's the end of the session. They've had elections. It's December, right? They're waiting to swear in the new guys. If at that point you send a bill to the president and there's less than 10 days left before you guys disappear, on January 3rd, for instance, and the president does nothing with it, doesn't even bother to veto it, that's a pocket veto. Why? What happens? The time runs out on you, time runs out on them, and there's no Congress to send a vetoed bill back to consider it anyway, at least not the Congress that passed this bill, and that becomes a pocket veto. A veto that's effected without the president having to actually say, I veto this thing. They use that model to invent the pocket rescission. What if you just hold on to that money and pretend you've impounded it and litigate it for so long that the fiscal year runs out? And so far, the Supreme Court has refused to get in the way of that. They actually, on the shadow docket, handed down an administrative stay that says we're going to prevent the lower courts from acting and saying, yeah, this is illegal and unconstitutional. It can't happen. The money's not impounded. Go spend it. We're going to get in the way of that for long enough that the fiscal year will expire and you'll have a colorable claim afterwards that money now can't be spent because the authorization for it ran out. You ran out the clock on it. You did it intentionally. We helped you do it, though. So is there any chance that we're going to reverse our decision and say, yeah, actually, we were wrong, and all the rules about authorization expiring at the end of the fiscal year are off with respect to this money? You can order that, but they'll probably say, what can you do? Time ran out. So if you got a Supreme Court telling them, yeah, you can actually do this, that's the answer for cutting money out for impoundment of spending that was authorized. What about this claim that he can spend whatever money he wants? The current understanding of government spending, and it really is a rather modern one, actually. The current understanding, though, is that, well, this part of the understanding has gone on since the adoption of the Constitution, that no money shall be appropriated from the Treasury but by act of Congress. So that's pretty clear too. But of course, what if everything's shut down? What if Congress is shut down? I'll appropriate. Well, Congress isn't shut down. It can't be shut down. But there's legislative appropriations, and they didn't pass those. Usually they do, because it's pretty easy to pass. And they don't want to have this situation. And I don't know. Maybe they even passed legislative branch appropriations. I would check on that. And Adelita Grijalva said something the other day that made me think that maybe they hadn't, but I'm not sure. Maybe they have, and it's just her. Yeah, she can't access it. That's another issue. All right. We'll get to that later. But Trump just basically believes, well, not only can the Supreme Court has told me I can impound money, at least for now. What about spending it? Well, again, that might just be a situation where Russell Vogt says, go ahead, order the spending. But no money shall be spent from the Treasury but by an act of Congress. Oh, really? Well, watch this. What branch is the Treasury? Executive. And who's the unitary executive? You are. Who's a good unitary executive? Who's a good unitary executive? I am. I'm the best. Yes. And so I order you, Secretary of the Treasury, write this check. It doesn't work that way anymore, but release this money. Well, I don't know. I mean, like a normal Treasury Secretary, I don't know. It could be unconstitutional. This one just says, yes, sir, and releases it. And everybody says, I'm going to litigate this to death. You're going to lose, and you are going to lose, but you're not going to lose anytime soon. You may not lose before the great cheeseburger of fate answers our question either. But even if that doesn't happen, basically he says, I'm going to spend the money. You can litigate all you want. I may eventually lose, but in the meantime, I'm going to walk around telling people I won. And to the extent people believe that I can win anything and everybody is caught up in the doomerism of it all, well, that just adds to his strength, or his apparent strength. But that's it. That's why this shutdown is going to maybe be a little bit different. It might mean that it lasts forever, like a long time, figurative forever. It may mean, literally forever. We're just not going to go back to the way it was because I like it this way as a dictator. It's a view. And what if he also thinks the courts are closed and can't rule on it? All right, welcome back once again to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We got a little bit more to share with you. I mentioned Adelita Grijalva, and there's a whole series of issues wrapped up in that. As you know, we discussed it yesterday. Adelita Grijalva has won that special election to succeed her father in his congressional seat. And 2, at this point, I do believe that all of the paperwork is done and the state has certified her election victory. It was not the case for the first couple of days. But as we mentioned, I think on Monday, that sometimes doesn't matter. The Congress has great latitude, constitutionally speaking, to decide that for themselves. What will it take for them to decide to swear someone in? You don't have to look that far back for an example of someone being sworn in before the official state-issued certificate of election arrives at the Capitol by snail mail and is processed by the clerk and handed over to you could do it that way, and it probably would be the best practice to do that way always. But why do they change things? Well, because out of necessity or convenience, and of course the Constitution affords the 2 houses of Congress the right to their own rules of procedure, and that means that they can change their rules of procedure on a whim. So, like I said, you don't have to look very far back. The winner of the special election just recently in Virginia to succeed Jerry Connolly, it's sometimes it makes a difference that the guy is local and Congress, knows that this election just took place in the shadow of the Capitol building, basically. And sometimes they just accept that. But from the hinterlands, like Arizona, wow, no telling what happened there. That shouldn't have anything to do with it, and really usually doesn't. But the guys who get elected from the local jurisdictions, the local congressional districts, can, of course, get themselves to the Capitol a lot faster, too. That may accelerate things. But there's no logical or legal reason to treat them differently. But they did. I already forgotten the name of the guy, Whittington, something like that. I'm sorry. You're brand new, and you weren't in my district. So I don't know. But the guy who won the election to succeed Jerry Connolly, day after it was said in the newspapers that he had won the election, the official results weren't there yet, wouldn't be there for a week. They said, this doesn't make a difference. It's not critical to our control of the House and our control over the floor of the discharge petition, for instance, to release the Jeffrey Epstein files. So what the hell? We'll swear him in. Whereas Adelita Grijalva would be the 218th signature on the discharge petition. And although there's 1,500 ways for them to derail the release of the Epstein files, even in the face of a successful discharge petition, they don't want to deal with it if they don't have to. And guess what? They don't have to. The Speaker of the House says, I'm not going to swear her in because the results aren't official. All right, sir, the results are official. Well, we haven't gotten her certificate of election from Arizona yet. Actually, now you have. Well, what I'm telling you is I'm the Speaker of the House and I'm not going to do the swearing in. Well, actually, it doesn't have to be the Speaker of the House. Well, it does if you want to convene the House to do it, which, kind of have to do at some point, because I'm not going to do it. Yesterday, they had a pro forma session of the House, and there's some, nice video if you want to see what this looks like of how having the gavel in your hand, sort of the ultimate example of the one who holds the gavel is making the rules. He is, it was another member had been designated to preside over the opening and closing of the House pro forma session. And he gets up there and, pursuant to the order of whatever date it was or whatever agreement, whenever date they made it, the House will now be in session. I'm presiding. We'll have the opening prayer. They'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. And then when the Pledge of Allegiance is done, he just starts reading the script that says, pursuant to the order of whatever, the House now stands in recess until whatever date they're reconvening. And as he's saying that, there are 100 Democrats on the floor, because they've assembled for this purpose, shouting out, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I demand to be recognized. They were going to ask for the swearing in of Grijalva. They might have asked for a unanimous consent request to release the Epstein files. They might have asked for unanimous consent to consider a new CR to keep the government open. There may have been any number of things that they wanted to do, but they're all clamoring, and you can hear them, even though their microphones are turned off. They're picked up by the rostrum, speaker's rostrum microphones, and you can hear them clamoring to be recognized, and you can see on this member's face almost a grin, and I'm going to read right over you the fact that I now declare the House in recess, and you bang the gavel. Now the chair has the power of recognition. They're supposed to be recognized if they're on their feet and the House is in session and they're asking to be recognized. But you can just say, I don't hear you, and therefore I don't recognize you to speak. I don't call your name or your state. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia. I don't. And so therefore the next order of business is me gaveling the House closed, and that's that. And it's all over. The guy who holds the gavel makes the rules. So Adelita Grijalva wasn't able to get herself sworn in yesterday because they just said, well, the House isn't in session. But it was in session. Yes, but we closed the session before you asked. I would have done it if you had asked that Adelita Grijalva be sworn in, but you didn't ask. I was asking. No, you didn't. You were asking for recognition, and I didn't give you that. And if you're not recognized, then you can't ask for her to be sworn in. Therefore, technically, you didn't ask. That's kind of where we are right now. So Anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. I have an article here that also will open up some other discussion points, I think, from Notice, which we keep going back to. And I should learn a little bit more about who's behind Notice and why they keep writing such interesting things. This one is written by M. Lutkmeyer and Oriana Gonzalez for, again, Notice, Notus.org. Voters elected her to Congress. That's Grijalva. Mike Johnson is making her wait. He's the speaker. Subheader reads, it's a quote, "At this point, I can't hire staff. We don't have an office. I can't get around without being escorted," Arizona's incoming House Democrat Adelita Grijalva said on Tuesday. Yes, it's true. Why? Well, here's how the story gets told. Democratic Congresswoman-elect Adelita Grijalva has arrived on Capitol Hill. Her welcome present, an imminent government shutdown. Plus, of course, I want to sign that discharge petition, but you can't. How come you won't let me sign it? You're not a member of Congress. Yes, I am. I just got elected. Not according to the House, you didn't. I mean, it's not that you didn't get elected. It's that we haven't sworn you in. Why haven't we sworn you in? Because the speaker says, I'm not going to entertain anybody's suggestion that we should. That's basically it. Speaker Mike Johnson hasn't sworn her into the House yet, though she was elected on September 23rd to succeed her father, the late Representative Raul Grijalva, in Arizona's 7th District. And the looming possibility that the government shuts down at midnight, it did, would almost certainly make her entry into Congress even more complicated. It's frustrating, she said of her predicament. Now, Congress, again, doesn't shut down during a government shutdown, even though it's part of the government. So it shouldn't make her entry more complicated, just plain entry into Congress. That's not what they're really using to block her, swearing in. But it does complicate the rest of her trappings of office. What does this mean? At this point, she says, I can't hire staff. We don't have an office. I can't get around without being escorted, Grijalva told reporters on Tuesday. As much as the caucus, the Democratic caucus, has been incredibly supportive, they have to sort of wait for me or bring me in. That is to say, the Congress really does. Notice observed the Congresswoman-elect going through security Tuesday morning alongside visitors and reporters, something lawmakers typically don't need to do when walking through the Capitol. But she's not a lawmaker. She's been elected to the position, but she hasn't been created a lawmaker by the administration of the oath. And that's the other issue that I was going to go with in talking about this article. Does anybody remember way back when certain Republicans and conservatives insisted, for instance, situationally, that the oath isn't the important thing? Election is election. You got a certificate of election. You're legit. You're a member of Congress, whether the oath is administered or not. Why were they saying so? When we were just, pushing the procedural envelope a little bit and thinking about things you could do to force your way past Republican blockades, and you remember the famous Republican blockade. Maybe it worked out for the best in the end. I don't know. But we didn't like the idea that they were stealing a Supreme Court seat. And remember that we're doing that? Remember how important the Supreme Court is right now? How much different might it be if, though there are lots of people who are no fans any longer of Merrick Garland, but President Barack Obama did nominate Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court, and they blocked him for a full year because there was an election coming, and they really would rather see whether they could elect a Republican president and name Scalia's replacement themselves rather than handing it over to Barack Obama and his nominee. And they succeeded in doing so, which is crazy, but it happened, and we all remember that, right? Because it was so crazy, I was willing to say, well, what if we did something equally crazy in reverse? Supposing we really, 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 really wanted to have Merrick Garland in that seat. And in hindsight, maybe we didn't, but we would much rather have had him in that seat than the losers we ended up with, right? So, what was the proposition? The proposition was at the time, well, okay, Trump has at this point allegedly won the election. All the newspapers are saying he's won the 2016 election. He's going to be inaugurated in January of 2017, but January 20th. So what happens? On January 3rd, 2017, the new Congress ordinarily is sworn in. But as you can see, you can play with the swearing in a little bit here and there, right? Mike Johnson is doing it right before your very eyes right now. So I suggested, well, if that's something that you believe, although this was reversed in time, but if the oath is important and the guy with the gavel controls things and decides whether or not there's really going to be recognition of somebody speaking from the floor. I told you there was video from just yesterday of Democrats on the House floor. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I demand to be recognized. Well, I don't hear you, la, 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 la. We're adjourned. That's how it works. So what if on January 3rd, 2017, while Joe Biden, then Vice President of the United States, was still the presiding officer of the United States Senate and would convene any new Senate and then swear in the new members or people reelected or elected to new terms or whatever. What if when they all gathered in the well of the Senate expecting to be sworn in and somebody stands and says, Mr. President, and it's, Mitch McConnell, let's say, and he says, I'd like to be recognized to introduce the senators-elect for their swearing in. And Joe Biden, holding the gavel, says, that is a great idea. That's, in fact, normally what we'd be doing at this moment. But I don't recognize you for that purpose. Actually, at the moment, I have someone else that I'd like to recognize, and it's the Democratic floor leader who has some interesting stuff for us. We're still looking at the pending nomination of Merrick Garland, and because we haven't started a new Congress yet, it's still pending, although I guess technically, now that they adjourn sine die and convene a new Congress on the same day, that's real interesting too. Actually, Biden could have intervened at the point where there was going to be an adjournment sine die and say, no, let's not do that, because if we adjourn sine die, then Merrick Garland's nomination gets returned to the White House. So before we do that, and before we even get to the introduction of the new senators-elect, I have something to say, and that is that I recognize Senator XYZ for a motion to take up the nomination, to move into executive session and take up the nomination of Merrick Garland. Now, could he do that? Well, technically, no, and all the rules say, all right, but suppose he has the gavel and he just does it. Interesting. Now, if they have an adjourned sine die, that changes things. And there is another little wrinkle, too, right? Supposing he waits for after sine die. I guess, in order to do what I'm about to describe to you, and which I've described to you before, I guess, yeah, you want to adjourn sine die. And now normally that means the nomination gets returned, if you're following the rules. And that if the president, if Barack Obama were to renominate Merrick Garland, which he could do, technically the Senate rules usually prohibit the consideration of a nomination on the same day that it's made. But, of course, you can suspend that stuff using the nuclear option if you wish, or unanimous consent if you can get away with that. But the reason I wanted to do it after sine die is the terms of 1/3 of the Senate at that point will have expired, and the new senators-elect not having been sworn in. What if you sort of freeze that moment in time? Just use that gavel to say, sorry, I don't hear you asking to swear in the new senators-elect. However, there are now only 66 or 65, 66 senators, depending on the year, who are still currently in office. As it happens, there's a rather significant Democratic majority at this point among the remaining 2/3 of the Senate. And I will now entertain a motion to consider suspending the normal rules and allow for the consideration of Merrick Garland's nomination on the same day that it's been made. Or in fact, we could just say, I'm going to continue to hold the swearing in of new senators-elect in abeyance for 6 days. And today we're going to renominate Merrick Garland. Tomorrow we're going to reconvene, the same 66 of us, and hold a vote on the nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. And you will cry and scream and say, we have people with certificates of election here who demand to be heard. And if they were heard, as they should be, we would defeat this nomination and defeat this stupid nuclear maneuver. Yes, but I don't hear you, says the guy with the gavel. Could you have done that? Then Republicans swore, no, that's not the way this works. They said to me, they said that is not how this works. And they might have been right, but they might have been wrong. And how so? Well, supposing their supposition was the oath doesn't matter. The fact Biden could block their oath for 6 days and it wouldn't matter. They're still senators. Why do I know this? Because I'm pointing at the Constitution that says the terms of the new senators shall start on January 3rd of that year, just as the term of the presidency begins and ends on January 20th. Theirs begins and ends on January 3rd, except if it's Sunday. We still sometimes do that. Nowadays, we actually just will go ahead and do it on Sunday. But the original understanding was you could bump it a day or two if it was Sunday. Anyway, their point is that the Constitution defined the beginning and ends of the terms. Maybe, yes. However, the fact that the term begins doesn't mean the same thing as service in that term beginning. The oath of office needs to be administered, and that too is prescribed in the Constitution, that there has to be an oath. The Constitution can't demand that there be an oath administered and you just ignore the oath and say, yeah, I'm following the Constitution. That's a real problem. That's a black and white contextual problem, or textual, not contextual, but textual problem. The oath matters. And there are a lot of examples of the oath mattering. And as a matter of fact, as it happens, at the time, again, Biden would have been presiding as Vice President of the United States and President of the Senate. Joe Biden's first oath of office as a federal legislator was delayed. He wasn't on hand to take the oath of office with the rest of the senators because, of course, his family had just been in that tragic car accident. And he was at their bedside in Delaware. And the majority leader of the Senate went... Was it the president pro tem or the majority leader? I don't know. It doesn't have to be. But they visited him in the hospital in Delaware and administered the oath there under those circumstances just to get his term started. His term started on January 3rd. He just wasn't in it to fill it. Lots of things happen. A term starts. What if the member of Congress dies before they can take their oath? That happened. That happened during COVID. Somebody died, a Republican who died of COVID, denying the whole thing, never showed up to take the oath of office. Yeah, the term started. There was just nobody in the seat. That is actually how it works. But Republicans insisted, well, the term begins. No. The oath. We've had this happen a number of times. And so here we're watching it happen right now. Adelita Grijalva, her term has started. She won the election. It's certified. It's not January 3rd. You could argue that, well, the term only starts automatically if you're talking about somebody who's been elected to a new Congress. Why? Show me where it says that. She's been elected. It's certified. Johnson's office says he's got the documents. They're just not swearing her in. Is she a member of Congress? No, she's not. Why? The oath that you said didn't matter when you were trying to prove that I couldn't possibly have engineered a way to sneak in, and it would be sneaking in, Merrick Garland before the new Congress came in and a new president came in and nominated some other Republican jerk instead. I don't even remember offhand which one of the jerks it is. Is it Gorsuch? I think so. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out. And every time there's a thing that pops up where somebody hasn't taken the oath and it becomes a problem, I point this out. And Republicans right now very happy to admit, no, the oath is what matters. Adelita Grijalva can't sign the Jeffrey Epstein files discharge petition. She can't, as she says, hire staff, get an office, or even enter the building without going through security or get on the floor without an escort because she's not a member of Congress because they haven't administered the oath. There was another similar situation, I think in like 2017, a Democratic wackadoodle who decided to take a honeymoon vacation over the January convening of the new Congress and missed taking the oath. And they pointed out, he's not a member of Congress until he takes that oath. He was elected. We have a certificate, but you got to take that oath, Republicans said, until they didn't say it anymore. Anyway, that's where I really wanted to go with this Notice article. But the current situation is that, as they said, Notice observed the Congresswoman-elect having to go through security and be escorted around with members in order to get any place. Not usually something that lawmakers have to do, but she's not a lawmaker yet. It's very much second-class citizen feeling for me, she said. Grijalva attended closed-door House Democratic meetings on Monday and Tuesday and was present at Democrats' press conferences on Tuesday on the shutdown, but there are limits to what she can do without being sworn in, which, of course, there wouldn't be any limits if being sworn in didn't really matter, right? Nearly all House Democrats attended Tuesday's pro forma session, an unusual tactic to protest Johnson's decision to keep the House out of session before the funding deadline Tuesday at midnight. They also demanded that Grijalva be sworn in. However, the session was adjourned without Democrats getting recognized on the floor. Johnson's team has been radio silent, Grijalva said. She said she has not received any guidance about being sworn in as of noon Tuesday. The only information she said she'd gotten was from reporters. A Johnson spokesperson told Notice in a statement that the speaker had received the appropriate paperwork from the state. So why not do it? The Speaker's office intends to schedule a swearing in for a representative-elect when the House returns to session, the spokesperson said. It's just, we're not doing it. The House Democrats are already speculating that there is an ulterior motive behind the delays in Grijalva's swearing in. Her election puts the spotlight back on Republican Representative Thomas Massey's discharge petition, for instance, to compel the Justice Department to release documents pertaining to Jeffrey Epstein. Massey told reporters last week that Grijalva has promised to sign the petition. They won't swear her in because they're worried about the Epstein files, Brad Schneider, chair of the New Democrat Coalition, said on Monday. We're better than this. No, we're not. And, well, you are, but they're not. And the Republicans should be here working with us to serve the American people, you wish. You can only assume that this is Johnson's, sinister motive, given the fact that there is no other basis for him to deny her being sworn in, Representative Julie Johnson told Notice. What do they mean? Well, Grijalva argued that in not swearing her in, Johnson was breaking Republicans' own precedent. While Johnson's spokesperson said it is standard practice to swear new members in during a regular House session, in April, two House Republicans, Representatives Randy Fine and Jimmy Patronis, is that right? Like the Patronus charm? I don't know. Patronus, perhaps. Anyway, both of them, guess what? You're never going to believe it. They were sworn in during a pro forma session within days of being elected. Yeah. We can still get sworn in when there's a shutdown, Grijalva said. She said that the Speaker's team has had her race's official results since the day after I won by nearly 40 points. There is no disagreement, no ambiguity. It's not a recount situation here. But Grijalva risks not having a congressional staff if she's sworn in during a shutdown. That's true. Once that happens, a shutdown, I can't onboard staff, she told Notice on Monday night. Not getting sworn in, she continued, prolongs the lack of constituent services to the district and representations of the district. All right, that's the end of the piece. I hate to end on an awkward statement like that, but yeah, that's one of the other fallout items for the shutdown. Can she onboard staff? Well, she can tell people they'll be hired, but she'd be asking them to work for free until they could bring back the congressional employees who process the paperwork of new hires. So there's that getting in the way. It's all very complicated and very interesting. And I took a totally different tack on that just to go back to 2016 for a little while and prove my point. But you got to pay attention to these things. Sometimes interesting stories reveal themselves, especially it's usually a pretty good bet that you will find if years pass in between examples like that, one or the other parties will have totally reversed their position depending on whether or not they're in the majority or the minority at the time. But Republicans, I guess, have remained in the majority for the bulk of that time. And anyway, as it turns out, they're willing to violate their own precedent to get their way. That should be no surprise to anybody, but it's interesting, and you won't read any newspaper stories about that aspect of it. That you can see the hypocrisy of not swearing people in during pro forma sessions, but so far no one has spent any time discussing that Republicans are flip-flopping on something as crucial and as central to the actual text of the Constitution as whether or not there ought to be an oath of office, which I guess shouldn't surprise anybody since their president is constantly violating his oath of office right in front of all of us. All right. Well, bit of a free-form segment there. But anyway, lots more to try to catch up on, and just one more segment left to do it with. But by the way, Rolling Stone also chiming in on the same subject. Dem says Mike Johnson is delaying her swearing in, probably to prevent her from voting on that Epstein thing. Jeffrey Epstein, everybody. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Time to cram in as much as we can in the last segment, a bit of a lightning round. Maybe. If we just can't make it work, we can't make it work. We still have, we got a show for you coming together, pre-recorded for tomorrow. That'll get to some of the longer pieces. But we still got Friday on our plates. And, of course, we'll continue afterwards, too. There's no shutdown of the program. It doesn't depend on federal appropriations. All right, where do we need to go? Well, let's throw in a couple of interesting items. First of all, I guess maybe we'll do this one. Back to, all right, I'm going to recall for you, listeners, the saga of, what's her name? Alina Habba, the not U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey. And, of course, John A. Sarconi III, as the AIII people would have it read to you. U.S. Attorney, not U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of New York. I think he's in the same situation. He certainly tried to pull the same maneuver. And I keep pointing out to you, Trump and paperwork, man. I'm telling you, almost anything can be undone if you examine the paperwork and you have the patience to do it. But you have to do it in the face of illegal executive orders from Donald Trump and all of the pressures that it creates. So it's difficult to do. But it probably has occurred to you at some point. Well, gosh, if it's happening to Alina Habba, and she's a personality we've heard of who's in the Trump orbit, if he won't even bother to do the paperwork correctly for Alina Habba, there's probably somebody else in the same predicament. And of course there was John A. Sarconi III, but we found that out about the two of them, I think in reverse order. So but still you may be saying to yourself, well, see, if it can happen to Alina Habba, then it can happen to anybody. Pardon me. Okay. Went for the mute button on a sneeze. Didn't get there in time. All right. Now we have to leave that in. Otherwise it creates timing problems. Shoot. Anyway. Maybe we can eliminate the sound of it anyway, regardless. All right, note to self. So, I was saying, if it can happen to Alina Habba, then it can happen to someone else too. It did, John A. Sarconi III. But you might imagine, well, there's what, 90, what's the number? 93, 92 districts that are supposed to have U.S. attorneys. Several of them probably don't, and there's probably more people like this out there. And there are. So for today, we add, let's see, this new name to the list. Do I have? Yeah. First, I had Kyle Cheney's Blue Sky notification. That wasn't a full write-up. I don't know. I probably have newspaper write-ups about this by this point, but I have his breaking news post on Blue Sky, and then I think a democracy docket write-up of this from last night. And I didn't have, it didn't occur to me, didn't have time to go and get a newspaper write-up of it. You won't need it, though. Here's what's going on. Kyle Cheney posts yesterday, breaking: a second Trump-appointed U.S. attorney has been disqualified after a federal judge ruled her appointment invalid. Now, this, as I was saying, is really the third such example we know, but I guess maybe it's only Alina Habba out of Habba and Sarconi III have had their appointments invalidated. I don't remember. Now I can no longer recall the specifics of the Sarconi III situation, but we'll take Kyle's word for it for the moment. There's another one. Or maybe he's only talking about women who are not U.S. attorneys. This time, Sigal Chattah, is it Chattah or Chattah? I don't know. Chattah, Chattah, is out as U.S. attorney in Nevada, just like Alina Habba in New Jersey, though, of course, Alina Habba is still hanging around pretending to be doing the job. But instead, not actually doing the job. She's just refusing to leave, and courts are insisting that they got to have documents that she signs be co-signed by other people who actually are officially in office, and they're doing that, which is amazing that didn't embarrass you enough to just leave. Anyway, this time it is accompanied by a screenshot from an order from Judge David G. Campbell in Nevada, who says it is ordered 1. Defendants' motions are granted to the extent that they seek disqualification of Ms. Chattah from supervising their criminal prosecutions. Ms. Chattah is disqualified from supervising these cases or any attorneys in the handling of those cases. The government attorneys handling these cases shall, within 7 days of this order, file statements in the docket that they are not being supervised by Ms. Chattah in their prosecution of these cases. They shall amend the filing if that changes at any time during the life of these cases. 2, defendants' motions are denied to the extent that they seek dismissal of their indictments. I'm sure they would rather have had that. 3, these cases shall be reassigned to the district judges in Nevada to whom they were originally assigned. The undersigned judge will remain available to handle similar motions filed in other Nevada cases if warranted. Dated yesterday, signed by David G. Campbell, senior U.S. District Judge, senior United States District Judge. Why? What is the rest of the gobbledygook about? There were federal defendants on trial in the district where, Chattah was purportedly U.S. attorney, but they made motions to dismiss their cases because she really shouldn't be U.S. attorney and shouldn't be supervising the attorneys who are running their cases. And shouldn't that also mean they dismiss my case entirely? That decision was litigated before and decided by a different judge. David Campbell took that motion, but their trials are still before the other judges where they were before. The defendants interrupted that with an interlocutory appeal, well, not an appeal, but a motion a motion in limine, I guess is what we're talking about, to have the cases dismissed. Do I have my terms right? Have the cases dismissed before they went any further. Take it away from the trial judge and have a different judge rule on this point of law. Well, he's done that, and he says now it goes back to those trial judges. That's all that the rest of the gobbledygook meant. Now, I mentioned to you that there was a piece in Democracy Docket. They'll do a little bit of legal explaining on this one and remind you of just how effing stupid this whole situation is, and that Trump is such a doofus and all the people around him are so dumb, and they really just don't care for rules or law or the rule of law for that matter. And so they just keep making this mistake because they're like, well, make me do something, essentially. Junior Rivas is the writer for this Democracy Docket post. Federal judge rules Sigal Chattah unlawfully served as Nevada's U.S. attorney. Isn't that something? The top prosecutor in this district was unlawfully serving. You'd think they'd want to avoid stuff like that. A federal judge ruled Tuesday that Sigal Chattah, a Trump loyalist and appointee, has been a Trump appointee as well, has been unlawfully serving as acting U.S. attorney. What kind of U.S. attorney? That's right, the acting U.S. attorney for the District of Nevada. They got a whole state there. They don't divide it up like New Jersey, a whole state. U.S. district for the District of Nevada since late July. U.S. District Judge Gloria Navarro, appointed by former President Barack Obama, concluded that Chattah's continued service after our 120-day interim appointment expired stemmed from a series of manipulative personnel moves that violated the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, essentially the same ones we heard about with Haba and Sarconi III. The FVRA is a carefully crafted assertion of Congress's power under Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 of the Constitution. Article 2, Congress's power? That would ordinarily, you think, be Article 1. But, sometimes they mix and match these things when they're talking about the president's power to appoint them. And then they, give their advice and consent? Is that what we're talking about? I better just check out of curiosity. I assume the judge gets it right. Article 1, Section 2. What are we doing? Clause 2. Right, that's the advice and consent part. So there you go. It is a congressional power, even though it's under Article 2. I got to remember that. Anyway, its purpose, the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, would be defeated if the executive branch, the very branch Congress was trying to constrain, could choose whomever it wanted, whenever it wanted, and fill the vacancy simply by declaring that person to be first assistant. Similarly, but on a different track, the purpose of a number of laws like the Impoundment Control Act would be frustrated. Is that the word that they use? Defeated. The purpose would be defeated if the executive branch, the very branch that Congress was trying to constrain with the Impoundment Control Act, could choose whenever it wanted, whatever it wanted to rescind funding and or spend money out of the Treasury on his own say-so. That would be weird, right? Anyway, the ruling is the second time within 2 months that a federal court has struck down the Trump administration's efforts to keep a hand-picked loyalist in power without Senate confirmation. In August, a judge in New Jersey ruled that Alina Habba had been illegally serving as U.S. attorney there under nearly identical schemes. Navarro underscored that Congress never intended for the executive branch to reshuffle staff to extend control over top prosecutorial offices. Defendants' motions are granted to the extent they seek disqualification of Ms. Chattah from supervising their criminal prosecutions, Navarro added. Ms. Chattah is disqualified from supervising these cases or any attorneys in the handling of these cases, which sounds exactly like what the other judge signed. So, maybe that was her ruling and they appealed that ruling and the senior judge chimed in to say, that's going to stand. Now everybody go back to the trial courts where they're supposed to be. Except you, Ms. Chattah. You're not supposed to be there at all. The decisions come the same day that Reuters published an exclusive report showing that Chattah, while unlawfully in office, urged voter fraud probes. Can you believe it? Designed to help Republicans and sought to shield Gops operatives implicated in Nevada's fake elector scheme. Don't forget that they did that in 2020. We're still, it is now 5 years later, pretty much, and we're still not getting anywhere on taking people to trial for forging electoral college votes. So I guess just to tie this back to what we were talking about earlier and the unitary executive and the government shutdown and the Impoundment Control Act, they just say, we can litigate this for years. Why don't we just do what we want to do? They'll litigate it. Eventually we should lose, but one, a hamburger could kill us between now and then, or two, we could throw out the entire constitutional scheme either all at once or bit by bit, or just, hold a coup or whatever it is we feel like doing. We'll see what happens, essentially. They just say, oh, we could lose this case. We should lose this case. Roll the dice, because as long as they're tumbling, nobody can do anything. We can just say, we'll abide by what the court has to say. The court just has to say it. 5 years on forging electoral college votes. We're getting nowhere. Anyway, that and other actions taken together underscore how Trump's allies sought to weaponize federal prosecutors to advance partisan goals. The court stopped short of dismissing the indictments against the defendants who brought the challenge, but disqualified Chata and anyone under her supervision from further participation in the cases. The ruling is expected to be appealed by the DOJ. So we're still not done. They're absolutely 100% correct. This is absolutely 100% the correct outcome. They got it right. They're solid on the law. We'll appeal. You may lose, and you may lose very quickly. But until you do, they're running around saying, no, we're appealing. This is still an open question. That's lawfare for you. That's exactly where we are. Why no mention of Sarcone III? I'm not sure. I was hoping that he would say, differentiate the Sarcone III case from the Haba case to refresh our memory about what's happening. This still doesn't clear anything up. I would find it difficult to believe that people at the Democracy Docket don't know about Sarcone III and his situation. So my guess is that there's something different about the way they structured his replacement than there is about the others. And I'm not sure. I just don't remember the details offhand. But okay, maybe we can revisit that another day. Time now for some other things that I think are extremely important that I need to get on the record. Let's see. There could be that. We could go that direction. We could go this direction. How about this one? International affairs. Something weird is happening here that also has not yet been written up by the newspapers, though perhaps in the last hour and a half it's happened. I happened to see a post, again, on Blue Sky from Mark Chadbourne. So let's open up that post in the browser and take a look at it. Who's Mark Chadbourne, for starters? Let's see. Empowering people with news and information about a dangerous and confusing world. Oh, thank you. Everything is connected. That is all good. Journalist, novelist, screenwriter. Okay. Well, I think he's onto something here. How it reached his eye. Oh, here's the answer. Axios. I don't read Axios stuff. So here we go. Trump has signed and here's a quote from the Axios thing, an Article 5 like, not Article 5 of the Constitution, but Article 5 of the NATO treaty like security guarantee following an Israeli strike on Doha, Axios reports. Okay, I haven't seen the report, but someone else in the thread here includes a screenshot of that line. The United States shall regard any armed attack on the territory, sovereignty, or critical infrastructure of the state of Qatar as a threat to the peace and security of the United States. So if that were a real thing, and you should realize it's not. Trump has signed an Article 5 like security guarantee. You mean a treaty? Trump has signed a treaty. Treaties need to be ratified by the Senate. Hasn't happened. You can't just make up security treaties like that and sign them and say it's real, but he'll sign anything. And in his view, when he signs it, remember his childlike understanding, I signed it, I'm the president. That's law now. And he's not the only dummy that believes that. Remember, we were just as by way of an example, how this can work its way into the consciousness, at least of MAGA wackadoodles, that down at Texas A&M, where the Turning Point USA trained or type person spoke up in class and told the professor, you're not allowed to say something like there might be more than two genders. It's against our president's laws, right? And they never saw the what makes a law and what doesn't cartoon. And our president doesn't have laws. Well, first of all, he doesn't respect any of them anyway, but he doesn't just, the things he signs aren't laws. It's what he's supposed to be signing as laws. And they're counting on that confusion. The confusion between laws and executive orders and everything else. But just because it's on parchment and he signs it with a Sharpie and shows it to everybody doesn't mean it has any legal effect or is an executive order or is a law or anything like it. But he's hoping you'll ignore that and just say, I have a childlike understanding of the government too. I believe it's a law. So now he's doing it with international security agreements. What in the world is this about? Well, first of all, think about, by the way, all the things that are remarkable about that. One, he signs it and it's meaningless. Two, he's pretending it's a treaty and skipping Senate, approval. 2/3 of the Senate has to vote to approve it, by the way. Three, it's Article 5 like mutual defense for another country. Like maybe the Senate might have something to say about that. What are we on here? 4? Do I number these things? I forget. It's gutter. Like, wait a minute. We're pledging the United States military to defend an attack against gutter. Like we might say, hey, we'll help you out. But I don't know about this pledge idea. That doesn't sound great. Particularly considering, gutter is on the outs or has been on the outs for a while. I don't know. Maybe they've repaired things between themselves and their other Arabian Peninsula neighbors. You may recall that they effected a naval blockade of Qatar at some point. But on the other hand, things have improved since then. They, took down the blockade. We remain at one of the largest military bases in the Middle East in Qatar. And of course, they gave me a beautiful, beautiful plane for free. Doesn't cost anybody anything. So, we pledged the armed forces of the United States to your defense. What's the big deal? I can do that unilaterally. You gave the plane to me, not Congress. What do they care? They're not going to give you security. But no, you can't pledge that stuff. You can't pledge it to just anybody. Qatar is particularly, out of the blue bunch to be handed this thing. And you think we skipped it? Do you think I was glossing over it? They were struck by Israel. So just, by way of pointing out some of the complications that could come from this, right? We're going to stand by Israel, going to do everything. Israel never had a better friend. What Israel says goes. We're going to clear out Gaza and just redevelop it. And by the way, I haven't even gotten around to his mentioning. Someone told him he had a 21-point plan on this thing. That's a lot of points for Donald Trump to have a plan. But basically, the one that stuck with him was, we're going to have a board of peace. We're going to clear out Gaza and we're going to govern it with a board of peace. And they asked me, they did. I don't like pronouns, but I like this one. They asked me to be chairman of the board of peace. And I have humbly agreed. When I'm not working on the Kennedy Center or presidenting of the United States, I'm going to be chairman of the board of peace, which means if I say there's peace, there's peace. And that means peace in the Middle East. And that means Nobel Prize. Just letting you know. But yeah, so at the same time that he is whatever Israel wants, I'm totally on Israel's side. Let me be the president of the board of peace. Also, Israel strikes Qatar. And I'm also totally on Qatar's side because they gave me an airplane. And so that's it. Board of peace versus the airplane. Irresistible force meets immovable object. What happens? We can't be Israel maximalists and pledge Article 5 defense of Qatar and then have Israel launch a missile into Doha and say, I was for it before I was against it. Like, what are we going to do with this? It's you know what it is? The president is plainly insane and needs to be removed from office. That's it. How do you resolve this? And it doesn't matter because I do all the foreign policy and no one can tell me any different. So it doesn't matter that it's contradictory. We'll do what we do and we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I had another piece in here, I think, seeking to, it wasn't a write-up because I don't have that yet. But in case you were wondering, the White House has published this thing, not saying exactly what it was, but I think probably publishing it under the presidential actions and executive orders. So he now claims that this is an executive order, which I don't know. Is it? Or even if it is, so what? Assuring the security of the state of Qatar. And by the way, on the White House page, up at the top, there's a crawl in red here, usually news crawls at the bottom, but this is up at the top. Democrat shutdown. Democrats, in their own words, watch now. So it's promoting, of course, a Hatch Act violating political messaging on the thing. And then underneath it says there's a count up here that says Democrats have shut down the government. 10 hours, 52 minutes, and 29 seconds, and going up. And anyway, so here is the presidential action, quote unquote. By the way, I note for the record that is also the place is decorated with the presidential seal, or a stylized version of the presidential seal that has the numbers 45 and 47. They don't usually, I don't think, put the number of the president in the seal. They're just, he's the president. But I've been president twice, unlike anybody else in history. Sure, whatever. Here's the order: assuring the security of the state of Qatar, which it doesn't, but, whatever. We want you to feel good. We're saying we're going to assure the security of the state of Qatar. We don't know what we're going to do if it's threatened, but, we're saying it for now. So give me an airplane. By the authority vested in me, should we do it in his voice? It's long and he didn't write it. By the authority vested in me as president, by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, and in recognition of the enduring alliance between the United States and the state of Qatar, it is hereby ordered, Section 1, policy. Okay. Now, this is an interesting hybrid piece. We're going to put it in the form of an executive order, but then we're going to do rambling narratives that don't make any sense for the Section 1, policy. What's the policy, sir? Well, over the years, the United States and the state of Qatar have been bound together by close cooperation, shared interests, and the close relationship between our armed forces. The state of Qatar has hosted United States forces, enabled critical security operations. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. I know. What's the policy? Well, hold on a minute. It stood as a steadfast ally in pursuit of peace, stability, and prosperity. By the way, Doha, why was it hit by a missile? It's where the Hamas leadership lives. So, probably that. So it's going to make it even more difficult to resolve this, obvious conflict. But anyway, I have more to say. This all happens both in the Middle East and abroad, including as a mediator that has assisted the United States' attempts to resolve significant regional and global conflicts. In recognition of that history and in light of the continuing threats to the state of Qatar posed by foreign aggression, but Israel. I mean, most of the audience says, well, of course it's Israel. But I mean, I'm just saying from the president's perspective, I love Israel. Israel's never wrong about anything, although I'm getting a little bit frustrated with him. So, I mean, he's really setting himself up here, which I don't care. But there it is. Anyway, in recognition of all of that stuff, it is the policy, finally, in the last segment's fragment of Section 1 titled Policy, it is the policy of the United States to guarantee the security and territorial integrity of the state of Qatar against external attack. That's the policy. All right. The rest of the stuff was preamble. Section 2, commitment. All right, ready? We'll go faster than this. A, the United States shall regard an armed attack on the territory, sovereignty, or critical infrastructure of the state of Qatar as a threat to the peace and security of the United States. The 52nd state after Canada. B, in the event of such an attack, the United States shall take all lawful, and appropriate, measures, including diplomatic, economic, and if necessary, military, if they're not busy, occupying Portland, of course, to defend the interests of the United States and of the state of Qatar and to restore peace and stability. C, this part should be fun. It says this, the Secretary of War, which we don't have, he's still the Secretary of Defense, but I like to call him the Secretary of War. So that's questionable, effectiveness of this order in this section all by itself. Secretary of War, in coordination with the Secretary of State and the Director of National Intelligence, shall maintain joint contingency planning with the state of Qatar to ensure a rapid and coordinated response to any foreign aggression against the state of Qatar. There's a D. Secretary of State shall reaffirm this assurance to the state of Qatar and coordinate with allies and partners to ensure complementary measures of support. E, Secretary of State shall continue to partner with the state of Qatar as and when appropriate for conflict resolution and mediation in recognition of the state of Qatar's extensive diplomatic and mediation experience. So, given how experienced you are, we're going to help you because you need more experience from us. Section 3, implementation. All executive departments and agencies shall take appropriate steps to do this for general provisions, yada, yada, gobbledygook. At this point, we can kind of jump out of the thing. So what does it mean? Nothing. What's its effect? Nothing. How is he going to possibly resolve the internal conflict between this and his pledges of security to Israel? He can't. What are we doing here? I don't know. Does it make a difference? Is he ever going to be called upon to defend? Like, what happens? What happens? Israel launches a missile strike against Doha. Doha says, you told us you would defend our borders. We demand that you attack Israel. Well, we have other methodologies, and they do. They could impose sanctions. But that would, of course, mean that all the people whose heads they're bashing in for protesting against Israel were calling for more or less exactly what the president ends up doing in this situation. I don't know what to tell you about how he resolved this one. We're just not going to be able to do it. And I'll tell you what else. We'll sneak in one more thing, although we can't read you the full bit. I'm going to save this for later, but I want to give you this headline. Supposing you were to say, all right, that's it. The president is clearly out of it. We really do have to be doing the 25th Amendment here. This is plainly insane. What are going to be the grounds here? Look, let me go to Google and search. What's the evidence? Does Trump have dementia or what? Well, don't look on Google because Google is blocking AI searches for Trump and dementia. We learned from The Verge, according to, if the version here is right, Jay Peters. Let me just tell you real quick. AI mode uncharacteristically pulls up a list of 10 web links instead of a written explanation. If you go to Google and you ask the AI assistant, what's up with Trump and dementia? No answer. By the way, though, they just checked. If you ask, what about Joe Biden and dementia? Oh, yeah. Same answer we always had. So just so you know about the further capitulation of the tech giants out there and what settlements have meant to them. Artificial intelligence and the search for artificial intelligence ends at the point at which you might ask it whether or not Donald Trump has dementia. You're going to have to rely on your regular old intelligence for that answer. All right, time now for us to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Come on, bring up my chat with Justice so I can tell you all after this what's happening.
Networksradio.com.
There it is. We're ready.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, what's tops for Justice? Canada. Canada is outmaneuvering Trump after his latest threats before American military generals and admirals. How do you like that? Let's find out more about what's going on there and around the country, not including Canada, and the rest of the world, which does include Canada, because it's separate. We'll see you on Friday.